26, 1.2 million Americans wake up, go to work, and then sleep in their cars. Not because they're unemployed, not because they gave up, but because having a job no longer guarantees a place to live. This is the working homeless crisis, and it's exploding faster than anyone wants to admit. In 2026, an estimated 1.2 million Americans with jobs are living in their cars. These are people earning paychecks, but unable to secure housing. Unlike traditional homelessness statistics, this group remains largely untracked because they avoid shelters and encampments while maintaining employment. School teachers, Amazon warehouse workers, hospital staff, delivery drivers, retail employees, and contractors now represent a growing share of this hidden population. Federal housing data reveals that over 60% of renters are cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of income on housing. For millions, that figure exceeds 50%, leaving zero margin for emergencies. A single unexpected expense like a medical bill, car repair, or insurance increase can instantly break housing stability. Once rent is missed, eviction typically follows within 30 to 60 days, regardless of employment status. The rise of car homelessness signals structural failure where income no longer guarantees shelter. This is not driven by substance abuse or unemployment, but by simple math. Wages have risen roughly 18 to 22% over the past decade, while rents have increased 40 to 60% in many metro areas. The gap has become unsurvivable. Car living has become the last buffer before total homelessness. When that buffer breaks, people fall directly into street homelessness faster than ever before. This represents systemic collapse, not individual failure. A full-time job used to guarantee basic housing. In 2026, that assumption no longer holds. The median hourly wage for many essential workers ranges between $18 and $24 per hour, translating to roughly $2,800 to $3,700 per month before taxes. Meanwhile, the average one-bedroom apartment in many U.S. cities now costs $1,800 to $2,600, not including utilities, parking, insurance, or mandatory fees. Landlords increasingly require renters to earn 3 times the rent, meaning a $2,000 apartment requires $6,000 monthly income or $72,000 annually. This far exceeds what most service sector and blue-collar workers earn. Even studio apartments are failing affordability thresholds. As a result, people with steady employment are simply rejected, not evicted. This forces workers into impossible choices: sleep in cars, commute longer distances, or quit jobs entirely. In high-cost regions, workers often live inside the same parking lots where they work, arriving early and leaving late to avoid attention. The system now demands labor while refusing shelter. This breakdown impacts local economies. Employers face higher turnover, increased absenteeism, and burnout, while workers operate under chronic sleep deprivation. Productivity drops, healthcare costs rise, and labor shortages worsen. Not because people won't work, but because working no longer sustains life. The fundamental contract between employment and survival has been severed. Most working homeless Americans deliberately stay invisible. They rotate parking locations, sleep in hospital garages, industrial zones, big box store lots, and residential streets away from schools. Visibility increases risk of police contact, fines, or towing, any of which can end employment instantly. Unlike shelter populations, car dwellers often maintain clean clothing, hygiene routines, and professional appearances.
If you live in a Colorado zip code and have 0 DUIs in the last 5 years, listen carefully. I've been an insurance agent.
Many use gym memberships, workplace bathrooms, or public facilities to shower and prepare for work. This creates the illusion that the crisis is smaller than it actually is. In reality, it remains hidden by necessity. Municipal homelessness counts rely heavily on shelter usage and visible encampments, meaning hundreds of thousands are excluded from official data. Cities therefore underestimate the crisis and underfund solutions. When policies are written, these people are invisible until they are criminalized. This invisibility also prevents advocacy. Workers fear losing jobs if employers discover their housing status. Parents hide vehicle living from schools to avoid child welfare involvement. Seniors avoid reporting their situation out of shame. The result is a massive, silent population living one police interaction away from disaster. The working homeless are not absent from society. They are embedded within it, fueling the economy while being systematically erased from its protections. They work beside you, serve you, and remain unseen by design, not choice. In 2026, a used car is often cheaper than securing an apartment. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, application fees, and move-in costs routinely exceed $6,000 to $8,000. For someone already struggling, this barrier is impossible to overcome. By contrast, maintaining a vehicle may cost $300 to $600 per month, even with insurance and fuel. For many, this becomes the only viable shelter option. Vehicles offer privacy, mobility, and proximity to employment, things shelters often cannot provide. This shift represents a fundamental redefinition of housing. Cars are not being used recreationally, they are being used defensively to avoid full collapse. Once a person loses their vehicle, they lose access to work, income, and safety simultaneously. Auto lenders, insurers, and municipalities now indirectly control housing outcomes. Parking laws, registration requirements, and vehicle codes function as housing enforcement tools, even though vehicles were never intended to serve this role. This is not van life. This is not adventure. This is a forced adaptation to an economy that prices workers out of shelter while still demanding their labor. The distinction matters because romanticizing survival erases the crisis causing it. When cars become housing, the housing system has already failed completely. Even for those currently employed, income instability is accelerating the crisis. In 2025 to 2026 alone, over 1 million layoffs occurred across tech, logistics, retail, and healthcare support sectors. Many employed workers face reduced hours, unpredictable schedules, or gig-based pay with no guarantees. When income fluctuates, rent does not. Missed hours quickly become missed payments. Emergency savings for most Americans remain under $1,000, far below what is needed to survive even 1 month without full income. Short-term unemployment benefits rarely cover rent, and application delays leave workers exposed. Once housing is lost, recovery becomes exponentially harder. Employers may require a stable address. Background checks reveal eviction records. Transportation costs rise. Job searches become restricted by location and mobility. This is why car homelessness is exploding even among those who did everything right. The system offers no buffer, no grace period, and no recovery lane. One disruption is enough to trigger a permanent downward shift. The traditional safety net assumes temporary hardship with quick recovery. In reality, housing loss now happens faster than assistance arrives. By the time benefits are approved, eviction is complete. Workers who maintained perfect attendance for years find themselves sleeping in parking lots within weeks. The speed of collapse has accelerated beyond institutional response capacity. Once a worker is evicted, housing access collapses long after income recovers. In most states, evictions remain on tenant screening reports for 7 years, functioning like a financial felony. Even renters who regain stable employment are automatically rejected by large property management firms that rely on algorithm-based screening systems. Landlords increasingly outsource decisions to third-party screening companies. These systems do not evaluate context. Job loss, medical emergencies, or temporary hardship are irrelevant. An eviction becomes a binary disqualifier. As a result, people with sufficient income are locked out of housing indefinitely. Private landlords, once a fallback, are disappearing. Corporate ownership now controls a growing share of rental units and enforces uniform screening rules nationwide. This leaves evicted workers with no legal path back into traditional housing, even years later. Car living becomes a long-term condition, not a temporary setback. Workers are forced to remain mobile, avoid detection, and rebuild life outside the housing system entirely. This is why the working homeless population keeps growing, even when employment numbers appear strong. Eviction is no longer a reset. It is an exit ramp from housing itself. The system offers no re-entry plan, no second chance, and no forgiveness. Once marked, workers remain excluded regardless of income, employment, or time passed. As vehicle homelessness rises, cities are not expanding housing access. They are expanding enforcement. Municipalities across the U.S. have increased overnight parking bans, anti-sleeping ordinances, and vehicle habitation laws, often under pressure from residents and commercial districts. These laws do not reduce homelessness. They redistribute it, forcing people to move constantly. Workers must now plan sleep around enforcement schedules, rather than health or safety. Some cities conduct coordinated sweeps that issue tickets, warnings, or immediate tows. Each interaction carries risk. A citation can cost $100 to $500. Failure to pay leads to license suspension or vehicle impoundment. This transforms homelessness into a legal liability, not a housing issue. Crucially, enforcement occurs without alternatives. Safe parking programs are limited, oversubscribed, or restricted by income, employment, or residency requirements. Many cities offer zero legal places to sleep in a vehicle. This approach converts survival into a crime while maintaining the illusion of order. Instead of solving the housing shortage, cities are managing visibility, pushing working people deeper into instability. The enforcement-first model assumes that discomfort will motivate people into housing they cannot access. It punishes poverty while protecting property values. The result is not fewer homeless workers, but more traumatized, criminalized, and financially destroyed ones. Vehicle towing is the most destructive trigger in the working homeless pipeline. A single tow can cost $300 to $1,000 upfront, with daily storage fees accumulating rapidly. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, recovery is often impossible. Lose the vehicle and you lose housing, transportation, and income at the same time. Most jobs are inaccessible without reliable transportation, especially in suburban or industrial areas. Missing work due to a tow often results in termination within days. Once a job is lost, reclaiming the vehicle becomes even harder. Impound fees grow daily. After a short window, vehicles may be auctioned off, permanently erasing the last asset the person had. This is why towing functions as a point-of-no-return event. It accelerates people from working homelessness into full street homelessness almost instantly. Cities rely heavily on towing revenue, while private tow operators profit from enforcement-heavy environments. The result is a system where economic collapse is monetized, not prevented. The towing industry operates with minimal oversight. Fees are set arbitrarily, storage lots are often distant from public transit, and retrieval windows are deliberately narrow. Workers returning from shifts discover their vehicle gone with no warning and no recourse. By the time they navigate bureaucracy, fees have doubled. The system is designed for profit extraction, not problem solving. What should be a recoverable setback becomes total life collapse engineered for revenue generation. One of the fastest growing segments of the working homeless population is families with children. Parents
I wanted the word cuppa, as in cup of tea, I thought would be great to mix with hug. When I saw the domain was available, I was like, I'm taking it, I'm trademarking it, I'm going with it. Hi, I'm Aaron, I'm the owner of Cuppa Pug. We are not a traditional cafe. When I saw Cuppa Pug go live, that's when it all clicked. Well, was that nice?
What does a comfort keeper do? By definition,
Parents with jobs are increasingly sleeping in cars while attempting to maintain school attendance and normal routines for their kids. Children do homework in back seats, eat meals from coolers, and rotate parking locations nightly. Parents wake early to avoid police attention and arrive late to avoid notice. This constant movement disrupts sleep, education, and mental health. Many families avoid shelters because they separate parents by gender, impose curfews incompatible with work schedules, or ban vehicles entirely. For these families, a car, however inadequate, offers unity and control. Schools often remain unaware. Parents fear disclosure will trigger involvement from child welfare agencies, even though the root issue is housing affordability, not neglect. This creates a hidden generational impact. Children experience chronic instability while systems fail to acknowledge their existence. The long-term cost, educational disruption, trauma, and reduced mobility extends far beyond housing. These children wake before dawn in parking lots, brush teeth in gas station bathrooms, and attend school as if everything is normal. Teachers rarely know, classmates never suspect. The invisibility protects parents from intervention, but leaves children without support. Developmental impacts appear later as anxiety, academic struggles, and difficulty forming stable relationships. The crisis is not just displacing families, it is programming the next generation for survival mode from childhood. Healthcare aides, warehouse staff, delivery drivers, sanitation workers, and public sector employees now make up a significant share of the vehicle housed population. These are workers society relies on daily, yet cannot house. Many earn too much to qualify for assistance, yet too little to meet rent requirements. This income gap leaves them unsupported by both the market and social programs. Some commute hours from sleeping locations to workplaces they help operate. Others live near hospitals, warehouses, and distribution centers because that is where enforcement is lighter and restrooms are accessible. This reality exposes a contradiction. The economy demands essential labor, but refuses to sustain essential lives. Workers are not failing the system. The system is failing its workers. The nurse who changes your bandages sleeps in her sedan. The delivery driver who brings your packages rotates between 3 parking lots to avoid tickets. The sanitation worker who collects your trash showers at a truck stop before his shift. These are not edge cases. They are the workforce keeping infrastructure functional. When essential workers cannot afford housing in the communities they serve, those communities collapse slowly from within. Teacher shortages worsen. Healthcare wait times increase. Services degrade. The crisis does not stay contained. It spreads through every system until functionality itself becomes unsustainable. Emergency shelters were never designed for working Americans living in vehicles. Most shelters operate on fixed entry and exit hours, forcing residents to leave early in the morning and return at night, often incompatible with shift work, overnight jobs, or long commutes. Missing curfews can result in immediate expulsion. Many shelters also separate families by gender, meaning parents and children cannot stay together. Others prohibit vehicles, forcing people to abandon the only asset keeping them employed. For someone working full-time, entering a shelter often means losing their job within days. Capacity is another issue. In many major cities, shelters are already operating at 90 to 100% capacity, with wait lists stretching weeks or months. Seasonal overflow programs are temporary and inconsistent. Safety concerns are significant. Reports of theft, assault, and lack of privacy deter many workers who must remain rested and alert to maintain employment. As a result, many choose car living as the lesser risk. Shelters are a crisis response, not a housing pathway. They do not address rent barriers, eviction records, or income-to-rent mismatches. For working homeless Americans, shelters often accelerate collapse rather than prevent it. The mismatch between shelter design and working life creates impossible choices where survival requires rejecting help. Living in a vehicle imposes extreme stress on the body and mind. Chronic sleep deprivation is common, as people sleep lightly to remain alert for police, noise, or safety threats. Studies link poor sleep to reduced cognitive function, increased workplace accidents, and long-term health damage. Hygiene access is inconsistent. Healthcare workers living in cars report difficulty maintaining sanitation standards, while food insecurity leads to reliance on ultra-processed, shelf-stable meals. This contributes to rising rates of hypertension, diabetes, and immune suppression. Mental health impacts are severe. Constant uncertainty, fear of enforcement, and social isolation drive anxiety and depression. Many avoid social interactions entirely to hide their situation, cutting off support networks. Healthcare access worsens. Without stable addresses, appointment reminders, prescriptions, and insurance continuity break down. Preventative care is delayed until conditions become emergencies, increasing long-term costs to the system. This is not a lifestyle. It is prolonged survival under pressure. Over time, even highly resilient individuals experience burnout, illness, and reduced work performance, making recovery increasingly difficult. The toll is cumulative. Each night of broken sleep adds to exhaustion. Each missed meal weakens the body. Each day of isolation deepens depression. Workers who once thrived now operate at diminished capacity, making mistakes they never made before, struggling with tasks that were once automatic. Vehicle homelessness is not the end stage of poverty. It is the early warning signal of middle-class collapse. Historically, Housing instability followed job loss. In 2026, housing loss increasingly precedes unemployment. When workers with incomes between $40,000 and $70,000 cannot secure housing, the traditional definition of middle class becomes meaningless. The economic ladder has lost its lower rungs. This phase occurs before tents appear. Cars allow mobility, concealment, and continued employment. Once vehicles are lost, visible homelessness rises sharply. What cities label a sudden surge is actually the final stage of a process that began years earlier. Middle-class erosion has ripple effects: reduced consumer spending, lower tax revenues, declining school stability, and increased healthcare costs. Communities feel the impact long before policymakers acknowledge it. Ignoring car homelessness is equivalent to ignoring smoke while the structure burns. By the time encampments dominate headlines, the collapse is already irreversible. The middle class was defined by stability, predictability, and upward mobility. Car homelessness represents the loss of all three. Workers who followed every prescribed path, earned degrees, maintained employment, and saved responsibly now sleep in parking lots. The American dream has not stalled, it is inverted. Hard work now leads downward, not up. Several forces converge in 2026 to intensify the working homeless crisis. Rents continue rising due to housing shortages, while insurance premiums, utilities, and food costs increase simultaneously. Wage growth remains modest and uneven. Interest rates keep homeownership out of reach, while investor-owned rentals limit affordability. Corporate landlords prioritize yield over occupancy, reducing flexibility for struggling tenants. At the same time, layoffs and automation reduce job security. Even employed workers face unpredictable income. Safety nets fail to adjust to real-world costs, leaving millions ineligible for aid. The result is acceleration. More people fall into vehicle living, and fewer escape. Recovery timelines stretch from months to years. The pipeline grows longer, not wider. This is why 2026 marks a turning point. Not because the crisis begins, but because it locks in. Every system that could slow the crisis is instead accelerating it. Housing construction lags demand. Rent control efforts face legal challenges. Eviction protections expire. Wage stagnation persists. Meanwhile, costs compound faster than incomes rise. The gap widens daily. What was once a problem requiring intervention has become a structural condition requiring transformation. Without fundamental change to housing policy, wage standards, and economic design, 2026 does not represent a peak. It represents the new baseline from which things only worsen. While workers lose shelter, several sectors profit. Municipalities collect fines and towing revenue. Private tow companies earn millions annually from impound fees. Parking enforcement budgets expand as housing access shrinks. Large landlords benefit from reduced pressure to lower rents. High rejection rates normalize exclusion, allowing units to remain priced beyond local incomes. Credit and screening firms profit from eviction data sales. Healthcare systems absorb emergency costs later, while preventative care collapses. The financial burden shifts without accountability. This is not accidental. Systems adapt to monetize instability rather than resolve it. When collapse becomes profitable, solutions stall. The economic incentives are clear. Cities balance budgets using enforcement revenue. Landlords maximize profits through exclusion. Screening companies sell data. Towing operators extract fees. Insurance companies raise premiums. Each actor benefits from crisis.
Are you worried that using your home address for business puts your privacy at risk? At iPostal One, we can help. So, you've started your own company, but feel unsafe using your home address for business use.
Crisis persistence. No single entity causes the problem, but all profit from its continuation. Reform threatens revenue streams. Solutions reduce extraction opportunities. The status quo, however destructive to workers, remains lucrative for institutions. This creates political inertia. Stakeholders resist change not from ignorance, but from interest. The working homeless crisis is not unsolvable. It is profitable. And profitable problems rarely get solved until the cost of inaction exceeds the benefit of extraction. that threshold has not yet been reached. The working homeless crisis forces a question that policymakers, corporations, and institutions keep avoiding. What does work actually guarantee anymore? For most of modern history, employment meant access to shelter, stability, and basic dignity. In 2026, that link is broken. When 1.2 million people with jobs are sleeping in cars, the issue is no longer wages alone. It is systemic failure. Workers are fulfilling their end of the deal, showing up, producing value, paying taxes, keeping cities functioning. In return, the system no longer provides the minimum requirement for survival, a place to live. This breakdown creates dangerous long-term consequences. If work does not secure housing, motivation collapses. Workforce participation drops. Job loyalty disappears. People stop planning for the future and shift into survival mode. Productivity, innovation, and community stability decline as life becomes transactional and temporary. The crisis also erodes trust. When people realize that education, hard work, and consistency no longer protect them, belief in institutions weakens. That loss of trust spreads faster than homelessness itself. Car homelessness is not an anomaly. It is proof. Proof that the economic model no longer aligns labor with life. Proof that housing has been decoupled from income. Proof that stability is now a privilege, not a standard. The defining question is whether working still means anything at all.
Now to an Eyewitness News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called van lords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent resident.
New at 10, the Phoenix City Council is limiting medical care to homeless people in parks.
About an hour ago, after hours of discussion, the council approved the controversial ordinance that opponents believe will cost people's lives.
450,000 Americans are about to lose the only homes they have left. Not because of eviction notices, not because of disaster, but because RV living is being erased, quietly, legally, and fast. Cities are changing laws, land is closing, towing is accelerating, and before 2026, nearly 500,000 people will be forced to move with nowhere legal to go. This is the biggest RV homelessness explosion in U.S. history, and it has already begun. An estimated 450,000 Americans currently living in RVs, vans, and vehicles face forced displacement before 2026 due to rapid legal and policy changes. This number comes from overlapping data on vehicle dwellers, long-term RV residents, and informal housing populations tracked by housing researchers and municipal enforcement reports. Unlike previous homelessness waves, this group already has shelter, but that shelter is being made illegal across the country. Between 2023 and 2025, cities accelerated bans on overnight vehicle parking, RV street stays, and long-term public land use. What makes this crisis unique is the speed of change. Entire communities that had existed for years were removed in 30 to 90 days, often with little notice or warning. In many areas, enforcement letters now warn residents they must relocate immediately or face fines, towing, or complete vehicle seizure. Most displaced RV residents do not qualify for emergency shelters because they are technically considered housed. At the same time, they cannot transition into apartments due to rent requirements, credit checks, and deposits exceeding $5,000 to $8,000 in many metro areas. This creates a legal dead zone where people are told to move but given nowhere legal to go. By 2026, multiple states plan coordinated enforcement expansions tied to public safety, sanitation, and zoning regulations. The result is a forced migration of hundreds of thousands of people who are not counted in traditional homelessness statistics, making the scale of this displacement largely invisible until enforcement begins. Since 2023, more than 70 U.S. cities have changed vehicle dwelling and RV regulations, often quietly without public hearings or media coverage. Instead of outright bans, cities shortened legal parking windows from 72 hours to 24, 12, or even 4 hours, making long-term vehicle living mathematically impossible for residents. Many cities implemented rolling enforcement zones where RV dwellers are forced to move every day or every few hours. This creates a compliance trap where moving constantly increases fuel costs, mechanical wear, and traffic violations. Average fuel expenses for vehicle dwellers in high enforcement areas rose from $120 per month to over $350 monthly. Another tactic is selective enforcement. Cities now use sanitation rules, trash accumulation thresholds, window cover restrictions, and oversized vehicle definitions to ticket RVs even when legally parked. Fines range from $75 to $500 per citation, compounding quickly and creating insurmountable debt. Crucially, these law changes often bypass voter input by being implemented through municipal codes or emergency ordinances. Many residents only learn the rules changed when enforcement arrives at their door. Appeals are rare, and grace periods are shrinking rapidly across jurisdictions. This approach allows cities to claim they are not banning homelessness while effectively removing vehicle dwellers from their communities. The result is mass displacement without formal relocation plans, shelter expansion, or housing alternatives, shifting the problem from one jurisdiction to the next while increasing instability nationwide. Public land was once the last pressure valve for displaced RV residents seeking legal places to stay. That valve is now closing rapidly. Federal and state agencies have intensified enforcement of the 14-day rule, reduced dispersed camping zones, and added physical barriers like berms, boulders, and gate closures to prevent access. Between 2020 and 2025, accessible dispersed camping acreage near cities dropped by an estimated 35 to 40%. Many former RV-friendly zones were reclassified as environmentally sensitive, overused, or restricted for restoration. In practice, this removes access for people with no alternative housing options available. Enforcement methods have also changed dramatically. Rangers now use license plate tracking, drone monitoring, and coordinated sweeps to identify violators. Fines for overstaying range from $150 to over $1,000, with vehicle seizure authorized after repeated violations in many jurisdictions. Travel distances to legal public land have increased dramatically in recent years. In states like California, Arizona, and Colorado, many RV residents must now drive 60 to 120 miles from job centers to find legal land, an unsustainable commute when fuel averages $4 to $5 per gallon. Public land agencies emphasize recreation and conservation, not housing, meaning displaced RV residents are treated as violators rather than constituents. As enforcement tightens, thousands are being pushed back into cities that already banned them, creating a closed loop of displacement with no legal endpoint for residents. RV parks were once the fallback for people exiting street parking or public land displacement. That safety net has collapsed completely. Average monthly RV park rent increased from $450 in 2019 to $900 to $1,200 by 2025, with some metro areas exceeding $1,500 monthly. This increase is driven by land redevelopment, tourism demand, and consolidation by private equity firms purchasing properties. Long-term residents are being replaced by short-term travelers who pay higher nightly rates. Many parks now cap long-term stays at 30 to 90 days, even for permanent residents who have lived there for years. Additional costs compound the affordability problem significantly. Most parks now require RVs newer than 10 to 15 years, proof of insurance, background checks, and deposits of $500 to $1,000 up front. For low-income or fixed-income residents, these requirements are automatically disqualifying regardless of payment ability. Even those who can afford monthly rent often fail age or insurance rules for their vehicles. As a result, thousands of RV dwellers are locked out of the only legal housing option originally designed for them. This pushes people back onto streets or public land, precisely where enforcement is increasing most aggressively. RV parks are no longer transitional housing solutions for displaced families. They have become exclusionary markets aligned with tourism and profit rather than survival, leaving vulnerable populations with nowhere to turn when facing displacement from other areas. A hidden driver of this crisis is RV debt accumulation. Between 2020 and 2022, hundreds of thousands of Americans purchased RVs at inflated prices during the pandemic housing squeeze when traditional housing became unreachable. Now, RV values have collapsed 30 to 50%, while loan balances remain unchanged at original purchase levels. Many RV dwellers owe $20,000 to $40,000 on vehicles now worth only $10,000 to $18,000 in current markets. Selling is impossible without default.
When you start Medicare, there's one single decision that is going to be more important than any other, and that's choosing between a Medicare Advantage and a supplemental.
Selling is impossible without defaulting on loans. Repossession means immediate homelessness for families. Refinancing is rare because RV lenders tightened credit standards dramatically after 2023 market collapses. Monthly RV loan payments average $400 to $700, often combined with insurance, registration, and ongoing maintenance costs. When enforcement forces constant movement between locations, mechanical failures increase exponentially. Major repairs including transmissions, roof leaks, and electrical systems regularly exceed $5,000, which most residents cannot afford without devastating financial consequences. This creates a debt trap where people cannot sell, cannot repair, cannot legally park, and cannot transition to traditional housing. Bankruptcy often does not help because RVs are considered vehicles rather than primary residences in many states under current laws. RV homelessness is no longer just a housing issue for displaced families. It is a financial lock-in created by collapsing asset values, rigid lending structures, and shrinking legal space to exist, trapping hundreds of thousands in impossible situations with no clear pathway forward. One of the least discussed accelerators of RV homelessness is insurance cancellation by major providers. Since 2023, multiple insurers have stopped covering RVs older than 10 to 15 years, especially full-time occupied units. This matters because insurance is required to enter most RV parks, storage lots, and even some city-designated safe parking programs. Industry data shows that over 60% of RVs currently used as primary residences are more than 15 years old. When coverage is dropped, owners are given 30 to 60 days to find a new provider, often unsuccessfully despite extensive searching. Specialty insurers that still offer coverage charge 2 to 4 times higher premiums, sometimes exceeding $250 to $400 per month. Without insurance, RV dwellers become instantly non-compliant with parking and residency requirements. Parks deny entry immediately. Municipal programs reject applications outright. Police can cite uninsured vehicles even if they are legally parked otherwise. In some states, repeated uninsured citations lead to registration suspension, which then triggers immediate towing. This creates a cascading failure across housing options. Once towed, reclaiming an RV costs $800 to $2,500 in fees, money most residents do not have available. After 30 to 45 days, impounded vehicles are auctioned or destroyed completely. Insurance companies frame this as risk management, but the effect is structural eviction of vulnerable populations. People are not losing housing because of behavior or violations. They are losing it because insurance markets no longer recognize RVs as legitimate residences. Towing has become one of the most powerful displacement tools in the RV homelessness crisis nationwide. Cities increasingly rely on vehicle codes instead of housing laws because towing bypasses court oversight and tenant protections. Once an RV is tagged, owners often have 24 to 72 hours to move or lose everything they own. Tow costs vary by region, but typically range from $400 to $800 for the initial tow, plus $75 to $150 per day in storage fees. After just 2 weeks, total costs often exceed $2,000. For many RV dwellers, this is more than their entire monthly income combined. Data from municipal reports shows towing actions involving RVs increased 40 to 70% in major metro areas between 2022 and 2025. In many cases, personal belongings, medications, tools, and essential documents are lost permanently when vehicles are impounded without notice. Once an RV is impounded, legal recovery options are extremely limited. Courts often side with municipalities if any code violation is present, including expired registration, insurance lapse, or size classification issues. Even when owners win appeals after lengthy processes, fees are rarely refunded to residents. This process mirrors eviction, but without tenant protections, relocation assistance, or shelter placement options. Towing is fast, quiet, and irreversible for families. For thousands of RV residents nationwide, the tow truck is the exact moment they move from vehicle living into absolute homelessness with no possessions remaining. RV homelessness is no longer driven primarily by unemployment or job loss. By 2025, estimates show that 25 to 30% of long-term RV dwellers hold full-time jobs, while many others work part-time, gig, or seasonal positions consistently throughout the year. Despite employment, housing remains unreachable for working families. Median rents in many metro areas exceed $1,800, while landlords increasingly require income equal to 3 to 4 times monthly rent. That means a worker must earn $65,000 to $85,000 annually to qualify, far above wages in retail, logistics, caregiving, and service sectors. Vehicle dwellers face additional employment barriers beyond affordability. Without a fixed address, job applications, payroll systems, and background checks become complicated or impossible. Some employers quietly reject applicants who list P.O. boxes or shelters as addresses, creating further obstacles. Commuting costs also rise dramatically for working vehicle dwellers. Workers forced to relocate daily or live far from job centers spend $300 to $500 per month on fuel alone. Missed shifts due to enforcement sweeps or towing often lead to immediate termination without appeal options. This flips the traditional homelessness narrative completely. Employment no longer protects against displacement or housing loss. RV living has become a last resort housing strategy for workers trapped between stagnant wages and accelerating housing costs, with no clear pathway back to traditional housing despite maintaining full-time employment throughout the crisis. Adults aged 55 and older now represent the fastest growing segment of RV homelessness nationwide. By 2025, seniors account for an estimated 35 to 40% of long-term RV residents in some regions across the country. Fixed incomes are the core issue driving senior displacement. The average Social Security benefit is approximately $1,900 per month, while average rents exceed that amount in most urban areas currently. RV living becomes the only mathematically viable option for survival on fixed retirement income. However, seniors face unique risks that younger populations do not. Medical care often requires a permanent address for service delivery. Prescription refills, Medicare Advantage networks, and home health services frequently deny service without proof of residence. Missed care leads to rapid health decline and emergency situations. Physical limitations also make constant relocation dangerous for older adults. Enforcement zones requiring daily movement disproportionately affect seniors with mobility issues, chronic conditions, or disabilities. Falls, heat exposure, and missed medications are increasingly reported among older vehicle dwellers facing enforcement pressure. As enforcement intensifies across cities and states, seniors are often the first to be displaced from established locations and the least able to recover afterward. This demographic shift signals a deeper structural failure in American society. Retirement is no longer a housing-secure stage of life in America for millions of older adults who worked full careers, paid into Social Security, and followed traditional pathways to retirement security. Rather than banning RV living outright, states are using indirect legal tools to eliminate it. These include sanitation codes, vehicle abandonment definitions, registration enforcement, and land use zoning rules that effectively make RV living impossible without explicitly stating that intent. For example, some states now define a vehicle as abandoned if it remains in the same area for 24 to 72 hours, even if actively occupied by residents. Others enforce utility hookup requirements on private land, making it illegal to live in an RV without full sewer, water, and power connections installed. Penalties escalate quickly for violations. Initial fines range from $100 to $500, but repeated violations can lead to misdemeanor charges, license suspension, or complete vehicle seizure. Each violation compounds, creating mounting legal problems for residents. This legal strategy avoids constitutional challenges while achieving the same outcome as outright bans: complete removal. Because these are vehicle or code violations, defendants receive fewer protections than tenants facing eviction. Due process is minimal or non-existent. By 2026, multiple states plan expanded enforcement budgets tied to public order and community safety initiatives. None include funding for alternative housing at scale or relocation assistance for displaced residents. The money flows only toward removal, not solutions. RV living is being erased not by a single law, but by thousands of small legal changes that collectively make survival illegal. Each change seems minor individually, but together they eliminate all legal options for hundreds of thousands of Americans seeking affordable housing alternatives. Emergency shelters are not a viable fallback for RV residents being displaced across the country. Nationwide shelter capacity has been operating at or above 95% utilization since 2024, according to municipal housing reports. In many metro areas,
your company's workflow could be as smooth as this. With Zoho, the smoothest, easiest.
wait lists range from 3 to 6 months, even for families and seniors. Shelters are also structurally incompatible with RV dwellers and their needs. Many prohibit personal property beyond 1 or 2 bags, meaning people must abandon tools, medical equipment, documents, and pets. An estimated 60% of RV residents own pets, instantly disqualifying them from most shelters that maintain strict no-animal policies. Funding is another severe constraint on expansion. The average shelter bed costs cities $35,000 to $55,000 per year per person to operate fully. Scaling shelter capacity to absorb even 100,000 displaced RV residents would require billions in new funding, money that has not been allocated by any government level. As a result, shelters prioritize street homelessness, leaving vehicle dwellers excluded despite losing their housing. This creates a significant policy gap where people are displaced from RVs, but never offered shelter placement or alternative housing options. Without capacity expansion, shelter systems act as a bottleneck, forcing newly displaced RV residents into unsheltered homelessness almost immediately. They lose their vehicles, possessions, and any remaining stability, entering street homelessness with no safety net remaining and no clear pathway back to housing security. Families living in RVs face rapid displacement due to school enrollment and residency requirements imposed by districts. Many school districts require proof of permanent address, utility bills, or lease agreements, documents RV families cannot provide once they are forced to move frequently between locations. As enforcement increases, families are being flagged as unstable, triggering mandatory reporting to child services in some states. Even when no abuse or neglect exists, housing instability alone can prompt investigations that threaten family unity and parental custody rights. Transportation is another significant barrier for families. Families often relocate 30 to 80 miles from school zones to find legal parking, making daily attendance impossible for children. Missed days quickly accumulate, leading to truancy actions against parents by school authorities. Childcare access collapses as well for working parents. Subsidized childcare programs frequently require fixed addresses and residency verification that RV families cannot provide. Losing childcare often forces parents to quit jobs, compounding financial collapse and making housing recovery impossible. By 2025, school districts in multiple states reported increases in vehicle-housed students, but without housing solutions attached to identification. Families are being penalized for housing conditions they cannot control or change without resources. For parents, RV displacement is not just housing loss affecting their shelter. It threatens custody of children, employment stability, and access to education simultaneously, creating compounding crises that devastate families and separate parents from children when Child Protective Services intervene due to housing instability alone. Rural counties were once seen as relief zones for displaced RV residents seeking affordable options. That option is disappearing rapidly. Since 2022, many rural jurisdictions passed ordinances banning RV living on private land without full utility hookups and septic permits installed. These rules effectively outlaw low-cost rural RV living completely. Installing compliant septic and utility systems can cost $15,000 to $30,000, far beyond the means of most displaced residents living on limited incomes or fixed benefits. Counties justify restrictions by citing environmental and health concerns, but enforcement focuses on RVs rather than traditional structures. Some areas issue daily fines of $100 to $250 for non-compliance, creating crushing financial burdens that force residents to leave quickly. Rural enforcement also lacks social services entirely. When RV residents are removed, there are no shelters, outreach teams, or housing programs nearby. Displacement becomes permanent exile rather than relocation to alternative housing options. As rural areas close to RV residents, pressure shifts back to cities which have already banned RVs from their jurisdictions. This eliminates geographic escape routes and concentrates displacement into crisis zones where services are already overwhelmed. The rural option, once a release valve for housing pressure, has closed completely. Displaced RV residents find themselves trapped between urban areas that ban them and rural areas that now prohibit them as well. There is nowhere left to go legally for hundreds of thousands of Americans seeking affordable housing alternatives. The underlying driver of RV displacement is a massive housing supply failure across America. The U.S. is short between 4 and 7 million affordable housing units, depending on income thresholds used in calculations. This shortage affects tens of millions of Americans. Construction has not filled the gap or addressed the shortage. New housing built since 2020 is overwhelmingly priced for upper-income renters or buyers. Units affordable to households earning under $50,000 annually represent less than 10% of new construction completed nationwide. At the same time, older affordable housing is being demolished or converted to higher rent uses. Mobile home parks, low-rent apartments, and extended-stay motels are disappearing faster than replacements are built, shrinking the existing affordable housing stock daily. Zoning restrictions block small-footprint housing such as tiny homes, RV parks, and modular units in most cities across the country. Even when funding exists for alternative housing, land use rules prevent deployment and construction of these desperately needed units. Without supply increases, displacement accelerates continuously. RV living expanded because traditional affordable housing disappeared, and now RV living is being eliminated without replacement housing ready for displaced residents. This is a supply crisis at its core. Until millions of affordable units are built, displacement will continue escalating. RV homelessness is a symptom of housing shortage, and eliminating RV living without addressing supply simply forces people into absolute homelessness with no shelter options remaining. The true scale of RV and vehicle homelessness is far larger than official numbers suggest because data systems are not designed to count mobile housing loss. Most federal homelessness statistics rely on point-in-time counts, which occur one night per year and focus primarily on shelters and visible street homelessness. Vehicle dwellers actively avoid detection during these counts. Constant relocation, enforcement pressure, and fear of towing push people into industrial zones, rural roads, or rotating locations that are not surveyed by count volunteers. Outreach organizations estimate that vehicle homelessness is undercounted by 200 to 300% in many regions. Funding decisions are tied directly to these numbers. When populations are undercounted, cities receive fewer federal dollars for housing assistance, outreach, and services. This creates a feedback loop where fewer resources lead to more displacement, which leads to even harder to track populations moving constantly. Another failure point is classification and reporting systems. RV residents are often categorized as temporarily housed, even when they have no legal place to park. This excludes them from homelessness assistance programs entirely, denying them access to resources. Because the crisis is statistically invisible, enforcement can expand without triggering emergency responses from governments. Displacement occurs in real time, while data lags 12 to 24 months behind. By the time numbers reflect reality, tens of thousands have already lost shelter permanently. This data blindness is not accidental. It allows policymakers to minimize the crisis while accelerating removal without political consequences or public outcry. What is unfolding is not a
Smart founders know something most people miss. Get your domain name even if you're not ready to launch your business. With Wix, you can grab yours now and then get to work.
What is unfolding is not a temporary housing disruption, but a structural shift in how housing access works in the United States permanently. Analysts tracking vehicle dwelling trends project that RV and vehicle homelessness could double by 2026, driven by compounding economic and legal pressures. Key indicators show no reversal coming. Average rents remain elevated, wage growth lags inflation, insurance access continues shrinking, and zoning reform remains stalled politically. At the same time, enforcement budgets for vehicle and public space regulation are increasing year over year across jurisdictions. Historically, informal housing expands during crises and contracts during recovery periods. This time is different fundamentally. RV living expanded to fill a permanent housing deficit estimated at 4 to 7 million units nationwide. Now that informal housing is being removed without replacement, displacement becomes irreversible for many residents. Once an RV resident loses their vehicle through towing, debt default, or mechanical failure, re-entry into any form of housing becomes exponentially harder. Credit damage, job loss, and loss of documentation cascade quickly, creating barriers to future housing. This marks a transition point in American housing. RV homelessness is no longer a fallback, it is a trap. Without large-scale housing creation or legal recognition of vehicle living, the system locks people out permanently from housing security. This is not a wave that passes with economic recovery. It is a new baseline condition in American society that will persist without major policy intervention. When a home becomes illegal, people don't just move, they vanish. If this crisis is affecting you or your community, comment below and make it visible. In the next video, we break down where displaced RV residents are being pushed next and why those options are disappearing fast.
With the holidays coming up, some
security. This is not a wave that passes with economic recovery. It is a new baseline condition in American society that will persist without major policy intervention. When a home becomes illegal, people don't just move, they vanish. If this crisis is affecting you or your community, comment below and make it visible. In the next video, we break down where displaced RV residents are being pushed next and why those options are disappearing fast. Across America, lawmakers are quietly preparing a massive crackdown on RV living. In 2026, 15 new laws will hit like a hammer. Bans, restrictions, towing authority, and harsh penalties the public knows nothing about. RVs will be pushed out of neighborhoods, out of cities, and in many cases, taken away entirely. This isn't a prediction, it's already happening, and 2026 will be the breaking point. Starting in 2026, cities across America are expanding laws that allow them to tow and destroy RVs deemed inoperable or unsafe, even with people living inside. California is leading this trend, and other states are following fast. The most dramatic change involves value thresholds. Under the new California model, any RV worth less than $4,000 can be seized without the owner's permission. That's a massive jump from the previous $500 limit. Why does this matter? Because over 70% of RVs used as shelter fall below that $4,000 mark due to age, wear, or mechanical issues. This means tens of thousands of people could suddenly lose their only home. Once an RV gets tagged as inoperable, owners typically have just 24 to 72 hours to fix the problem or move the vehicle. Most people can't manage either option. Repairs often cost $1,000 to $6,000, and towing fees run $350 to $750, plus daily storage charges of $65 to $150. If you can't pay, the city legally destroys your RV. There's no compensation and no appeal process. Housing advocates warn this could trigger mass displacement, especially on the West Coast. States like Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and New York are already drafting similar legislation. Dozens of American cities are updating their laws to strictly enforce 72-hour parking limits on RVs, vans, and oversized vehicles. While these rules existed before, 2026 brings something different: aggressive enforcement, higher fines, and automatic towing after just 3 violations. Under these new ordinances, your RV cannot stay parked in the same public spot for more than 3 days, even if it's fully legal, insured, and running perfectly. Cities like Seattle, Portland, Denver, Los Angeles, and San Diego estimate these enforcement policies will remove 30% to 50% of all street-based RV residents. The laws also target rotation parking, where people move their RVs a block or two every few days to avoid citations. In 2026, most cities will require RVs to move at least 1 to 3 miles away to reset the 72-hour clock, making small moves illegal. Violations cost between $50 and $220 per ticket. After 2 violations within 30 days, many cities classify the RV as abandoned, triggering an automatic tow. Reclaiming a towed RV can cost $1,500 to $3,000, impossible for most people living in their vehicles. This doesn't just affect homeless residents. Traveling RV families parking near beaches, lakes, or urban attractions could also face tickets and towing. The nighttime RV parking ban is one of the most disruptive laws expanding across U.S. cities in 2026. Under this rule, sleeping inside an RV parked on public streets between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. becomes illegal. Originally started in coastal California cities, over 40 municipalities nationwide are now considering similar bans, citing
I play Linda Little in Send Help. She's at a point at the beginning of the movie where she's expecting this big promotion.
I just don't think you got it.
considering similar bans, citing public safety and sanitation concerns. What makes this law particularly harsh is that it criminalizes the act of sleeping, not just parking. Police use thermal imaging, condensation checks, privacy coverings, and window inspections to determine if someone is sleeping inside. First-time violations typically result in $75 to $300 fines, but repeated violations escalate to criminal citations and vehicle impoundment. For homeless RV residents, this means moving every single night, often several miles away, just to avoid detection. For travelers or recreational RV users, any overnight stop in urban areas becomes legally risky. Families parking near beaches, lakes, special events, or tourist destinations are especially vulnerable. Cities defending these bans claim that nighttime RV occupancy leads to increased waste dumping,